Hey there, LDS music enthusiasts. Today we're looking at hymn number 1005 in the newly released selections from the new LDS Hymnal. It's a lovely gospel hymn in mostly primary song format called His Eye is on the Sparrow, with words by Sevilla Martin and music by Charles Gabriel. It's an old favorite in the gospel music tradition. It made its appearance in several movies, including Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit, and it's been recorded by artists around the world, such as Whitney Houston and many others. There are several challenges about turning a song like this into something suitable for a hymnal. By and large, I think they've done a really good job. I do have a few little suggestions, which I'll share inside the 9 writing techniques that I'm going to show you today. Technique number 1, invigorating boring chords. All right, here we are at the very beginning of His Eye is on the Sparrow. Now, it's always challenging when you have multiple measures of the same chord because you don't want the music to become boring. And they've done a great job in this opening phrase here of keeping the 2-measure tonic chord quite interesting. The way they've done it is instead of just playing block chords of 1 chord, 1 chord, 1 chord, 1 chord, which would be rather boring, they have taken it and done a little horizontal thing where they start with the tonic note and the tenor, they step down, 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 and up and down again. That little internal motion completely changes the interest level of 2 full measures of 1 chord. So instead of sounding like with just straight 1 chords, now we have this little internal linear motion. That's a great technique. So anytime you have the same chord for 2 whole bars in a row, you want to do something with the motion to increase the interest. Technique number 2, a favorite mashup chord. Here at the end of the first line, we go to the 4 chord and the 5 chord. Why should the shadows? Pretty standard progression to go from 1, very standard progression, to 4 to 5. But instead of just doing normal old 5, because the note of the melody does not actually fit the normal 5 chord, we have to do something to that 5 chord to get that note to fit. And what the arranger did in this particular case was to do what's called a 5/11 chord. A 5/11 chord you can think of as kind of 2 chords colliding, where you take the root of the 5 chord, in this case the F, and you take the notes of the 4 chord, in this case E flat, G, B flat, and you put them together. Which is cool because we've just played a 4 chord, so we play the 4 chord, and then we keep the 4 chord all except for the bass notes. And then we resolve. So it's sometimes we call it like a mashup kind of a sound. The technical chord is the 5/11 because we have an 11th above the bass, which is the B flat. And when you have an 11 chord, you usually also have a 7th and a 9th. The E flat is the 7th of F, the G is the 9th, and the 11 is the B flat, which makes the 4 chord. E flat, G, B flat over F. It's a nice, colorful, different sounding 5 chord that has a nice freshness to it. 3, elongated fake modulation. So we have this term in music harmony called tonicization. Tonicization is very similar to modulation. When you modulate, of course, you go to a new key and you stay in the new key. Tonicization is almost the same. You approach a new key by using the harmony of that key, but then instead of keeping the music in that key, you come back to the original key. So we have a moment here on the second line on Why Should My Heart Be Lonely, where we tonicize the 2 chord. The 2 chord on the word lonely is C, E flat, G. And if you pretended you were in the key of C minor, you think, well, what's the 5 in C minor? Oh, it's G, B natural, D, F, 5, 1. Well, the G chord in the key we're in, B flat, is normally a G minor chord, G, B flat, D. But here on Heart B, they've made the B flat B natural, which is the leading tone to C. We've tonicized C. In other words, we make it feel like 5-1 on C, which is the 2 chord. Now, this is a very common kind of chromaticism where we do the 5 of another chord. What's different about this spot is we're tonicizing that C minor chord not only with its 5, but we're also going back a step further, and we're going to the 2 chord in C minor also. So we really get a 3 chord grouping that's as if we were in the key of C minor. What's so cool about this is it's a bit of a surprise in an unsuspecting kind of a way. Let me explain. So measure 4, we have this, our first cadence, where we've ended on the 1 chord. Now the bass steps down to A flat. Normally, when the bass steps down from the tonic note, in this case B flat, a whole step down to A flat, you normally keep the B flat chord and put the A flat in the bass, which they could have done here. The melody lets that happen. But instead, they do a little bit of a shift, and they move the B flat up to a C right there. So now we don't have a B flat dominant 7 chord like our ear tells us we should with that A flat in the bass. Instead, we have an F minor chord. But there's no F minor in the key of B flat. There's F major, because that's the 5 chord, but there's no F minor. So how do we make sense of that chord? Well, that chord fits into the key of C minor, which we're tonicizing on this downbeat. So if you start at that downbeat lonely and you go backwards to Heart, G7, and back again to D half diminished 7, it's really a D half diminished 7 chord. The root is right there. We get a standard, very standard 2-5-1 in the key of C minor. But that's inserted into the key of B flat major. It sounds really cool. So we get to this come. Hear how it feels like we've arrived in C minor? That's because not only did we have the 5 of C minor, but we had the 2 and the 5 and the 1 of C minor, but slipped into the key of B flat major. Excellent technique. Technique 4, a turn to transform less interesting tunes. All right, we're here in measure 9, and we're going to take a look at the melody. Now, remember back at the beginning, we looked at how we took what was kind of a boring 2 full measures of the same chord and made it far more interesting with that little internal stepping motion. Well, we're going to do something similar here, but in the melody. So if we're looking at the melody from the beginning of this line, and long for heaven and home, when now this could have been very boring. When Jesus is my portion. I mean, it's not terribly boring, but it's, repeating the same note too long gets boring. That would have probably been fine here. It's not really too long. But instead of playing 4 B flats in a row, whoever wrote this tune was really smart because they made it far more interesting by using a neighbor group. So you see I've circled the A and the C and labeled it NG. That stands for neighbor group. A neighbor group is 2 notes that don't fit the chord, but surround a note of the chord. So when we hit the word Jesus, and then on the is, we go back to 1, but now we're in first inversion, but the melody goes below it, and then above it, and then back to it. Oops. That's a neighbor group. It makes the melody far more interesting than... It gives this little turn. A turn is when you circle around a note. And so we get a melodic turn here, which makes it super interesting. It's a very nice melodic technique. And in fact, they liked it so much that they did it again in measure 11. Technique 5, making the sparrow soar. Now, in measure 13 and 14, we have a really nice little harmony thing happening here from this chord to this chord. When you see two chords that have a whole step between their bass, that's an opportunity to fill that whole step with a half step. So instead of just going from the F chord at the beginning of 13 to the G minor chord at the beginning of 14, the composer, the arranger, filled it in with that half step. That's a great technique. Now, when we do that, we either build a diminished chord on that half step wedge, that F sharp wedge, or we build a dominant 7 chord and the note in the bass is the third of the chord. Those are the traditional two options. So this is a really nice way of giving that sparrow a little bit of a soar by doing the it's that upward motion we look up. It's that kind of a feel. Now, I have a little suggestion here in the melody, and I know this is probably going to sound like blasphemy because this is a well-known tune. So maybe it's more of a suggestion for the harmonization, but let me tell you what I mean. The way that the chord is written on Sparrow, we kind of lose the F on the row of Sparrow. I mean, it's not bad, but it gets a little bit lost because it's in sort of a closed position. I think if that G had been down here, then it would stand out a little bit more. It gets a little bit lost. So, if this were a student of mine and not a famous piece that everybody knows and will want to shoot me if I change the melody, and if they really liked the voicing of this chord, then I would make a suggestion to change the tune slightly, and I would change it to a C there and a B flat there, so we would get the tune loud and clear without it getting messed up by the accompaniment. I quite like that. Again, this is a famous tune, so the chances of changing it are slim to none. I think it keeps the phrase a little bit fresh because look, coming up we have 2 bars of mostly F in the melody. Again, just an idea. Well, nobody's going to want to change the tune, but if this was a student of mine, I would have suggested that. So the other thing to do, like I said, would be to just revoice the chord beneath Sparrow so the B flat and F stand out a little clearer. It's a subtle thing, but it can help. Technique 6, easing the pianist's burdens. Now, this technique, it comes from a place of me not being sure whether this is a primary song or a hymn. It's a little bit ambiguous. At the start, it looks like a primary song, but when we get down here, they say harmony. So now it's more like a hymn. I'm not sure what the intent is, whether to call it a primary song or a hymn. But for most of the piece, 17, 18, 19, 20 measures, it's written as if it were a piano part for a primary song. So this technique is coming, the suggestion I'm going to make in this technique is coming from the point of view of this as a primary song. So when we get to this spot right here, I find this problematic slightly for the pianist. So at the beginning of that line, we're on Eyes on the Sparrow. Da, da, dun. That's very choppy. Whatever the notes are. But the ba-ba-bum, it's like suddenly very angular. I don't think we need to make that sound. I mean, we have to in the melody because of the words. Ta-da-deem. But it suddenly takes what's been a really kind of a gentle 6/8 feel, da-da-deem, and made it a lot more angular than the smooth flow we've had. So if someone were inclined to change that, one suggestion would be to, on beat 2 there, to keep the C as a dotted quarter stem down, and to have the G flat go to an E flat on this note, and just hold as an 8th note while the melody goes ta-ta-team. That'll keep it smooth. Listen to the difference. Here it is as written. And here it is with my suggestion. So we just get the ba-dum instead of. It may seem like a small detail. Kind of is. But I think it does make a difference in the smoothness of the feel. And the same thing happens again down here towards the end. Now, they've said harmony here, so I guess that makes more sense, because if we are singing S-A-T-B, then the tenor and the bass, they do need to re-articulate both of those to get the words in, and I know. So that might have been the reason for reiterating the 16ths, both in measure 18 at the end, to get those tenors and basses singing the notes. But we're not even in the harmony part yet up here, so I'm not really sure what the reasoning was. But if one wanted to thin it out, I think this suggestion would work. Technique 7, subtle shift creates rhythmic freshness. Here in measure 19, we have a really nice rhythmic change. Throughout the piece, we've had this rhythm of ta, 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 ta. A couple of times the rhythm changes and we get 8th quarter instead of quarter 8th. And it happens within one measure here in the blue measure, measure 19, which is really nice. So back to Eyes on the Sparrow. Quarter, 8th quarter, 8th quarter. Da, da. Now we get quarter, 8th quarter. That's really nice. Da, da, ti, da, da. Because again, we're trying to avoid monotony. The definition of composition is surprise. So if we, and it also means to assemble, by the way, but good composition has the element of surprise in it. We try to avoid monotony. So, and this is a very small change. It's a simple rhythmic switch instead of quarter 8th quarter, but within the same measure and right before a cadence is a particularly nice place to do that. Excellent way to freshen up your music with a simple rhythm turnaround. Technique 8, simplifying challenging singing syllables. In the last 2 lines where we go into harmony, there are 2 spots that I think could have a little bit of a better flow with a slight change. So I'm offering a suggestion here. I sing because I'm happy. Now, with the melody, that rhythm works really well with the word happy. It's a very quick English word. We wouldn't expand it and say happy. It's not that kind of word. Happy. We say it quickly. So to change the rhythm to 8th quarter and have happy happen quickly makes sense. The problem I'm having is with the men's parts and with the alto, really. They're asking us to repeat happy on the 2nd 8th note, happy, and then to have a melisma or to move notes while we're holding the E, happy. That feels a little bit funny to me. I would personally rather have the alto tenor, and bass say the P of happy on the 6th chord, on the G minor chord. While the melody is going happy, the rest are going happy. It's not too long, but to say happy that way. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. Now again, that's only alto, tenor, bass, not the melody. But to go happy, happy, I don't know, it just feels a little awkward to me. So for what it's worth, a suggestion. The other one is at the end of this line. I really like what they're doing here harmonically. But again, rhythmically, I'm not quite sure about the word placement for alto, tenor, and bass. My suggestion would be to keep the melody saying, I'm free for his, but to have the chord change. It's really, actually, it's more of a where the chord changes issue, not so much where the words are. We're on a chromatic chord here. We've gone to this chord that does not fit the key. I sing because I'm free. It's this wonderful opening up. I'm free. And then there's a syncopation after. It's okay. It feels a little bit awkward to me. I would personally rather have the chord on 4 right here happen the 8th note before. So the altos would move from F sharp to G on the 4th, 8th note of the bar. And the basses would move from D to E natural on the 4th, 8th note of the bar. They hold it as a quarter and then go to the F sharp on the 6th, 8th note. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 1. Let's see if I can play the right notes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Maybe go back so you can hear it in context. I sing because I'm free. Again, very subtle, but because we've hit a chromatic chord, in my way of thinking here, we need the rhythm to help us find the grounding on this new chromatic chord. So by having the chord shift on the 2 strong beats, in my mind, in my ear, in my way of balancing harmony and rhythm is a little bit stronger. Just a suggestion for what it's worth. There it is. Technique 9, a telltale ending signal. Here we are on the last line of the piece, and this is an excellent time to use a chord that is usually saved for endings. We do see it other places, of course, but it does have a special place in codas or endings of pieces, and it often signals, aha, the end is coming. So here we get on the downbeat of bar 25, after what we just spoke about a second ago, we land on that G minor chord. And then this one. The A flat and the tenor. His eye is on the Sparrow. Now, what chord is this? Well, if we look closely, it's B flat, D, F, A flat. It's a 1 chord because we're in the key of B flat major, but it's a 1 chord with a chromatic note on it. Dominant 7 instead of A natural, which fits the key signature. We get A flat, which does not fit the key signature, making this chord dominant, like a 5 chord. And when you have a dominant chord, it needs to resolve, but it resolves to E flat, which is not the 1 chord here; it's the 4 chord. So this is a dominant of the 4 chord, and it is a telltale sign that the end is coming. Okay, I don't know if that's in the book of Revelation or not, but it's that the telltale sign of the end, coming of the end of the piece, not the world. So, I is great chord, and it does, in fact, take us home. We get another couple of chords, and then finally we get the 1-6-4, the 5-7-1. Beautiful chord, often saved for the ending. Highly recommend the use of this. It's a beautiful sound. What it does is, by taking us to the 4 chord, 4 is called the subdominant, and it has generally in history a more pastoral, shepherd-like feel. And since we're singing about the shepherd who has his eye on us, the little sparrows, what a great time to give gravity and have the chords zoom in to that 4 chord, which is like the shepherd, putting the spotlight on the shepherd. So it has this really warm nature. And it's different than, say, the 5 chord. The 5 chord has a more muscular sound to it, but the 4 chord has this gentler, softer side. And so by tonicizing that 4 chord, putting this 1 chord with the dominant 7 on it, going to the 4, it enhances that shepherd-like warmth. It's a beautiful technique. So what's my opinion of this hymn? I quite like it. I think it's a nice addition to our hymnal. I think it's quite fun to bring in something from another tradition, in this case the gospel tradition, into ours. Why not? It's still very appropriate, very sacrament meeting friendly. I think, as I mentioned, there are a few spots that could use a slight update here and there. Some of those rhythm suggestions and others. Again, just as a suggestion, I have no control over this, but felt that I could share my opinion. If you'd like to download my complete harmonic analysis of this song, I've dropped a link in the description box below. It's a free download. You can use it to study or do whatever you want with. Be sure to watch for the next video in our series of the new LDS hymnal reviews. In the next video, I'll review hymn number 1006. Please hit the bell, hit the subscribe so you don't miss anything, and I'll see you in the next one.